everybody has a right. All those in power tend to limit the rights and freedoms of people. They always have. They do now. And this tendency will continue because by limiting people's rights it is easier to rule them and to accomplish political aims, even noble ones. But parliaments and governments are not free to do whatever they wish. They are restricted by constitutions and by international conventions which emerged after the Second World War, when the world realized how cruel even a democratically elected government can be towards its own citizens, and how it can be dangerous for citizens of other countries. Yet those in power fear public opinion. A citizen who knows and understands his rights and who knows how to defend them is no longer helpless.
Wszyscy ludzie rodzą się wolni.
All people are born free and equal in their dignity and rights. This unalienable and innate dignity of an individual, whatever its religious or philosophical justification, provides the foundations from which identical sets of freedoms and rights arise. What are human rights? Limits to power. Power and rulers have always been here from time immemorial. Historically, power was inherited, and the justification for this was found in religion. In chapter 23 of his religious work, addressed to the Roman authorities, Tertullian wrote, "The emperor should be respected as the one who has been chosen by our Lord. Therefore, it would be right to say that the emperor is our ruler to the extent that he has been appointed by our Lord." This tradition of divine origin of power is still present today in the subconscious, in those in power in particular. They are reluctant to realize that what they actually do is serve and not rule over the nation. In the name of presidents, parliaments and governments, authority is exercised by state functionaries. Officials and judges are equipped with powerful constraining instruments such as the police, prisons and the army. Their power is limited by the rights and freedoms of all individuals. Mankind has invented a number of instruments and ways, duly introduced in the internal organization and legal systems of state, effectively to limit the power of officials and to permit genuine protection of the people's rights and freedoms.
Na świecie funkcjonują trzy modele relacji.
The modern world knows three models of relations between the individual and power. In the model typical to the communist constitutions, power is primary, and it is the power that grants definite rights and freedoms to citizens. At the close of the 18th century, continental Europe developed a model based on contract. Treated as equal subjects, individuals and the forces in power entered into a contract whereby it is the duty of those in power to observe the rights of citizens. In the American model, the fundamental element is man with his natural rights and freedoms. The forces of power, appointed by individuals to serve them, has the extent of right which individuals decide to hand over to it. This is not just theory. Take one and the same legal norm and interpret it in each of the above three models. What you get are three entirely different results, entirely different judicial decisions, and entirely different social reality. This philosophy of relations between individual and power is usually included in the Constitution. The Constitution is the foundation of a state's political system. It specifies who can decide and according to what procedure. Therefore, the Constitution identifies the rulers and defines the extent of their power, as well as the relations between the legislative, executive and judicial authorities. A well-constructed constitution introduces mutual control and balance between those authorities. It also specifies the human rights and freedoms to be guaranteed by state. The Constitution also defines the duties of citizens. A failure in those duties would make it impossible for the state to exist. The social contract for a constitution is in fact a social contract, can be concluded at a variety of levels. For example, the citizenry agrees to hand over a larger portion of their income to the state, which in turn undertakes to organize free health services. If that portion is bigger still, the state might, for example, provide free education or unemployment benefits. This is just a matter of agreement. There are three functions of any state to which citizens must necessarily contribute: organization of the army, the police, and the courts. No academic theories or lectures can possibly replace procedural rights. To a lesser extent still, these rights can be replaced by fine declarations and promises of politicians. Procedural rights are a set of techniques that make it possible for a person to force those in power to observe his rights and freedoms. Often, formal recognition to a smaller extent of a person's rights and freedoms, accompanied by the instruments forcing those in power to respect those freedoms and to guarantee those rights, is superior to a multitude of fine declarations included in legal acts, but leaving a person helpless when confronted by the power of the state. Constitutionalism is the principle whereby all power is limited, and whereby forces of power can act and decide only within strictly defined limits, the limits being defined by the rules of constitution. Thus, the authorities are only permitted to do that which is explicitly permitted by law, while a citizen is free to do all what is not explicitly prohibited by law. At the same time, constitutionalism demands that the rules of the game, that is, provisions regulating the individual power relations, be clear, known to all, and never changed for trivial and short-lived reasons. The consistence of laws passed by the Parliament with acts of a higher rank, the Constitution or international treaties, is protected by constitutional courts or tribunals, of which the first emerged early in the 20th century. As a result of the totalitarian experience, such courts were established in a large number of countries after the Second World War. Once it is found unconstitutional by the Constitutional Tribunal or Court, a statute or another legal act has to be amended or quashed. For many years, the supreme power of the state, so to say, was the Parliament. A statute passed by the Parliament defines the citizen's position. It was the need for a better organization to provide for better protection of citizens' rights that led to the emergence of constitutional tribunals. What does it mean? It means that not even the legislature or the Parliament are given full freedom. It means that there are certain civil rights which no statute, that is, no parliamentary action, may infringe upon. Most countries with a long democratic tradition granted their citizens the rights of constitutional complaint. A person whose constitutional right has been infringed and who has explored all the possibilities of defending himself without vindication may approach the tribunal whose decisions are final. Power that is not controlled is bound to degenerate. To prevent this from happening, separation of powers was invented. We have the legislature, which passes laws, the executive, which governs the state and applies those laws, and the judicial authority, which bases on the laws settling a variety of disputes between institutions and between citizens and state. The three powers, which are fully independent of one another, exercise mutual control. Whenever one of them is starting to degenerate, the other two try to influence and change it. This mechanism worked for quite a long time, until great political parties emerged. The party that has won a majority in the parliament not only proclaims laws, but also fills posts within the government with its men. The triple separation of powers disappears. This is why elements of direct democracy are introduced in political systems of many countries. Mentioned most often are two such solutions. The first is a referendum. A specified number of citizens who find one of the valid laws immoral or wrong are allowed to demand a referendum whose results are binding. Thus, citizens can quash bad laws themselves without politicians acting as middlemen. The other solution is that a group of citizens, provided it is large enough, can submit a draft bill to the parliament independently of all political institutions. The parliament is not obliged to pass such draft, but has to examine it in public. And the electorate remember how the separate deputies voted and are sure to take it into consideration when electing the next parliament. A totalitarian state is polarized into us versus them, society and those in power. A democratic and liberal state is in turn composed of a variety of groups of different sizes. The point is to give all those groups the chance to present their own interests. This is the function of local governments, among other things, and also of a variety of social organizations. In fact, the more such groups operate, the more they are involved in this tug-of-war, but never against the rules of the game, the better for democracy and pluralization of the society. Of course, the rules of the game must necessarily be observed. The tug-of-war cannot turn into a rough and bloody battle. This is the essence of pluralism. For society to get organized, the citizens' goodwill is not sufficient. Good legal provisions are also needed. Those in power in totalitarian states were perfectly aware of this fact and included barriers in the legal systems effectively to prevent citizens from getting involved in independent activity. The more liberal the law, the less complicated the provisions regulating the formations of associations, foundations and societies, the greater the chance that citizens will become organized to protect their rights and thus more independent of politicians. Citizens must necessarily have at their disposal the instruments of protection of their rights and freedoms against those in power. Each and every power always tends to infringe those rights. The reason is that ruling gets easier if you infringe the rights of the people. And, as we all know, that uncontrolled power degenerates and absolute power degenerates absolutely.